Usually when we talk about history, especially modern history, there's this prevailing expectation of a very straightforward, almost clinical cause and effect.
Right, like reading a rap sheet or a psychological evaluation or something.
Exactly. I mean, you look at a historical figure, specifically an outlaw, a criminal mastermind, someone who has totally reshaped the underworld, and you automatically assume their origin story is entirely rooted in their immediate socioeconomic environment.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the standard sociological framework. We're trained to look at the immediate variables. You analyze the poverty of a specific neighborhood,
Right.
the political instability of a given decade, local corruption.
Yeah, the lack of institutional support.
Right. And you point to that cocktail of modern dysfunction and say, there it is. That's the soil that grew this person.
Exactly that, because it feels clean, it feels logical and manageable because it fits into a timeline we can actually comprehend.
It's neat.
Yeah, you look at a 20th century cartel leader who built an empire in the 1980s, and you analyze the 1970s to explain him. You don't usually look at that 20th century cartel leader and say, yes, clearly this is the direct result of 15th century European religious persecution and, specific migratory bottlenecks.
Well, no, you don't, because that would sound completely absurd to any traditional historian. I mean, we like our historical narratives to fit neatly into a single century, preferably a single generation.
Right, we want the visible context.
Exactly, the immediate context. The idea of stretching causality across 5 centuries and an ocean usually enters the realm of, historical fiction, or at least heavy over-extrapolation.
But then you step into the world of genetic demography.
Oh boy.
You step into the world of deep genealogical tracing and modern DNA sequencing, and suddenly that neat sociological framework is completely shattered. Today, we're looking at an ancestral landscape for you that defies everything you might think you know about modern Latin American history.
I am sensing a very elaborate setup here. Knowing the kind of historical labyrinths you usually drag us into, I'm already bracing myself.
Yeah.
What exactly are we unpacking in this deep dive today?
I'm so glad you're braced, because today I'm going to make a claim that is so bold, so incredibly unbelievable, that I fully expect you to fight me on it.
Oh, I probably will.
I know you will. Today, we are taking you, our listener, on a deep dive into a massive stack of sources. We have Spanish colonial archives, we have genealogical texts, specifically David M. Gitlitz's 2002 book, Secrecy and Deceit.
Okay, I know that one.
And J. Mesa's 1987 Genealogias de Antioquia y Caldas. But most importantly, we have a landmark 2000 study from the American Journal of Human Genetics, and our mission is to test a truly wild ancestral nexus.
Well, I have my analytical red pen ready. Let's hear the claim.
Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, one of the most notorious, violent, and infamous outlaws in modern human history, the architect of the Medellin cartel. I'm going to prove to you that he is a direct, genetically traceable descendant of 15th century Spanish nobility, and, much more specifically, Sephardic Jews who were fleeing the terrifying grip of the Spanish Inquisition.
Okay, wow. See, this is exactly what I was worried about.
Right.
This sounds like the result of spending way too many hours on obscure late-night internet genealogy forums where, everyone suddenly discovers they're related to Charlemagne.
I knew you would say that. But I have the data.
Look, I understand the appeal of these neat little narratives. It's incredibly seductive to take a 20th century Colombian cartel leader, a man whose life is so thoroughly, exhaustively documented within the specific context of the 1970s and 80s cocaine trade, and try to magically tether him to 15th century crypto Jews in Spain.
It's not magic, it's genetics.
It's a fantastic story. But you're confusing broad, generalized historical folklore with actual empirical fact. Connecting those two highly specific dots across 500 years, across the Atlantic Ocean and through the chaos of the Spanish conquest, that is a massive, highly unscientific stretch.
It is a massive stretch. I will completely grant you that on its face, it sounds insane. But that is exactly what we are doing today.
All right, let's see you try.
We're going to trace a literal documented family tree through 500 years of archival records. And then, when you inevitably try to dismantle those paper records, which I know you will,
Oh, I absolutely will.
I'm going to bring in the hard genetic science to prove that this wild ancestral nexus is biologically real.
I remain highly, highly skeptical. I mean, tracing lineages back to the 1400s is notoriously fraught with errors, vanity projects, and straight-up fabrications by families wanting to retroactively elevate their social standing.
Right, people buying fake coats of arms, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But I'll indulge the premise. Let's look at your sources. If we're genuinely going to test this claim, we obviously cannot start in Medellin in the 1970s.
No, we absolutely cannot. To build this case for you, we have to start at the very root of the family tree. We have to leave the New World entirely and go back to the Old World.
Long before any ships sailed.
Exactly. Long before any migration or cartel existed.
Fine. Take us to the Old World. Where exactly is the genesis of this supposedly grand lineage?
We're starting in 15th century Asturias, Spain.
Asturias, okay, the rugged northwest coast of the Iberian Peninsula. A region known for being notoriously difficult to conquer, even back in the Roman days.
Right. We are looking at the genesis of a very specific colonial branch that originates in this rugged terrain. And this branch begins with a highly documented noble coupling in the 1400s.
Okay, let's hear the names.
The names are Gutierrez Bernaldo de Quiros and Guiomar de Prado y Quiñones.
Let's provide a little essential context for you listening. Because when we talk about 15th century Spanish nobility, we're talking about a very specific, highly insulated class of people. The Quiros and Quiñones families were deeply embedded in the aristocratic, land-owning fabric of northern Spain.
They were the elite of the elite.
Yes. This was an era where your bloodline dictated everything. Your land, your military rank, your proximity to the crown. But I have to point out right away, aristocratic family trees from the 1400s are notoriously convoluted.
Which is a fair point.
They were often retroactively inflated or carefully pruned by later generations who needed to prove their quote-unquote pure blood to secure better political marriages or land grants.
That skepticism is totally fair, and it's exactly why I need to lay this out step by step using the verified nodes in the genealogical texts. Gutierrez and Guiomar are our starting node. They are the anchor point of this deep dive.
All right, I'm following.
And from this single noble couple, the family tree does something fascinating. It splits into two very distinct geographical destinies.
A bifurcation in the lineage. One family, two very different paths.
Precisely. You have one branch of the family that goes through a descendant named Beatriz de Quiros. Now, if you follow Beatrice's line, you're heading toward the Caribbean.
Okay.
Her descendants end up navigating the early colonial networks of the islands, places like Cuba and Hispaniola.
Which, geographically and strategically, was a very common trajectory for Spanish nobility looking to secure new wealth in the New World. I mean, the Caribbean was the first major hub of the Spanish Empire.
Right, before they went into the mainland.
Exactly. It was the administrative center before they really pushed deep into the South American continent.
Right, but we are not following Beatrice. We're following the other path. The other branch goes through a woman named Catalina Bernaldo de Quiros.
Catalina. Got it.
It's Catalina's line that stays anchored in Asturias, at least initially. She passes down this noble heritage over several generations, right there in the rugged north of Spain. Her descendants maintain their aristocratic standing, and this lineage eventually produces a man who changes the course of the family history forever.
And who is this pivotal figure?
We arrive at Conquistador Diego Alvarez de Castellón, born in 1562, died in 1611.
Okay, let's pause and look at the timeline. We've moved from the murky 1400s to the late 1500s. We've established a Spanish noble origin, and we now have a conquistador. But let me challenge the core premise here.
Go for it.
I'm still entirely unconvinced of where you're taking this.
Why? I mean, I'm giving you specific names, dates, and documented historical figures.
Because it's a lovely narrative. But
Yeah.
mathematically, it doesn't mean what you're implying it means.
Yeah.
Even if this Castellón branch is perfectly real, and I will grant you that Diego Alvarez de Castellón is a fully documented historical figure in the Spanish colonial archives.
Thank you.
Aristocratic ancestry from the 1500s does not automatically imply a direct, meaningful link to the specific demographics of the 20th century Colombian underworld.
You don't think it's a meaningful connection?
No, I think it's a statistical inevitability. Think about how geometric progression works in family trees. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and so on. The number doubles every generation.
Sure, the math gets huge.
Right. If you go back 20 generations to the 1500s, you theoretically have over 1 million ancestors, over 1 million. So you dig through the archives, you pick out one single noble line, the Castellóns, and you point to it and say, aha, Pablo Escobar is Spanish nobility.
I mean, he is.
It's a parlor trick. If you go back far enough, almost everyone of European descent is related to royalty or nobility. How do we get from Spanish manners in Asturias to the mountains of Colombia in a way that is actually genetically meaningful rather than just a mathematical quirk?
That is the perfect question to ask. I'm looking at these same archives, and I had the exact same thought. I mean, if you go back 500 years, aren't we all related to someone famous?
Pretty much.
But this is exactly why this specific lineage isn't just a statistical parlor trick. Because the answer to your question lies in what happens in the next generation when this family makes a very perilous, very specific journey across the Atlantic.
Show me the journey then. How does this specific line maintain its genetic integrity?
So we have Conquistador Diego Alvarez de Castrillon. In the late 16th century, he decides to migrate from Spain to the New World. But as we established, he doesn't go to the Caribbean islands like his distant cousins.
He bypasses the usual hubs,
He pushes further. He sails for the new Kingdom of Granada.
which is the sweeping colonial designation for the territory that primarily encompasses modern-day Colombia, along with parts of Ecuador and Venezuela.
Right. But Diego doesn't just arrive at the coastal ports of Colombia and set up shop in Cartagena. He pushes deep into the interior. He settles in a very specific, highly formidable region, Antioquia.
Okay, now we're getting to the geography.
Yes. Now, if you are listening and you aren't deeply familiar with the topography of Colombia, it is crucial to understand that Antioquia is not some breezy coastal paradise. It's an incredibly rugged, deeply mountainous, and geographically isolated region nestled high in the Andes.
And this is where my skepticism regarding the parlor trick starts to shift slightly. The geography of Antioquia is absolutely central to understanding its history.
It defines everything.
It really does. The Andes Mountains in this region are split into three massive parallel cordilleras. To get to Antioquia in the 16th or 17th century, you had to survive a transatlantic voyage, arrive at a sweltering, disease-ridden coastal port, and then undertake an agonizing, deadly trek.
Just brutal conditions.
Yeah. You had to navigate up the treacherous Magdalena River, fight through dense malarial jungles, and then literally climb steep, unforgiving Andean ravines. It was a logistical nightmare.
It was an expedition that actively filtered out the weak. It wasn't a place you casually passed through on your way somewhere else.
Exactly. It was a geographic dead end in the best possible sense for those who wanted to be left alone. If you made it into the valleys of Antioquia, you stayed there. The geography acted as a massive, impenetrable wall against casual migration.
And stay they did. Diego's descendants didn't just survive the trek. They integrated directly into the foundational colonial aristocracy of this mountain fortress.
So they set down deep roots.
Very deep.
Yeah.
His son, Mateo Alvarez de Castrillon, who lived from 1600 to 1686, became a capitán y gobernador. He married into the local administrative elite. They were securing the land, governing the isolated settlements, and consolidating their power.
So they're establishing themselves as the big fish in a very, very small, geographically locked pond. They are the ruling class of an isolated frontier.
Precisely. And Mateo has a daughter. Her name is Manuela de Castrillon y Vázquez.
Manuela.
And Manuela is the pivotal figure for our deep dive today. She's the linchpin. Because Manuela marries into another highly prominent, deeply entrenched local family. She marries into the Gaviria family.
Ah, the Gavirias. This is where the mathematical parlor trick argument I made earlier completely falls apart.
Oh, you admit it!
I do, because when you talk about Antioquia being a mountain fortress, you're describing something very specific in the realm of population genetics. We need to introduce the concept of a population isolate.
Yes, this is exactly why the millions of theoretical ancestors math doesn't apply here. Break down the population isolate for us.
A population isolate occurs when a small, foundational group of people settles in a geographically impenetrable region. Think of a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or, in this exact case, a high-altitude valley surrounded by massive, impassable Andean peaks.
So no one new is coming in.
Right. Because the terrain is so hostile to new arrivals, almost no new people migrate into the region for centuries.
It essentially stops the clock on the gene pool.
It acts like a genetic vault. Or, imagine you have a jar filled with a few red and blue marbles. If you pour those marbles into a massive, rushing river representing the general global population, they scatter, wash away, and disappear into the vastness of the water.
Diluted completely.
Exactly. But if you pour those red and blue marbles into a locked, watertight safe, and you shake that safe for 400 years, every single time you open it, you are only ever going to find red and blue marbles.
That is a brilliant way to picture it, the watertight safe.
Because there's no external gene flow coming over the mountains, the specific genetic markers of those original founders become concentrated and amplified. They'd bounce around the same isolated valleys, intermarrying generation after generation, century after century.
So the cousin lineages cross and recross.
Yeah, in a population isolate, you don't have a million different ancestors from all over the world. You have a few dozen foundational families whose genes are multiplied exponentially.
So if the Castellan and Gaviria families are part of that original founding population of the watertight safe,
then their genetic footprint on the modern population of that region wouldn't just be a tiny diluted drop in the bucket. It would be massive. It would be an enduring foundational pillar of the regional DNA.
I am thrilled that you're validating the genetic impact of these founders, but I have to push back on you now. I have to play the skeptic because there is a glaring contradiction in the narrative we're building.
By all means, point it out.
You just beautifully explained how this Spanish elite, these Castellans and Gavirias, locked their genes into this mountain isolate. They were the capitans, the gobernadores. They were the established ruling class answering directly to the Spanish crown.
Yes, they were the colonial aristocracy of the New Kingdom of Granada.
Right. But my original wild claim was that this exact lineage connects Pablo Escobar not just to Spanish nobility, but specifically to Sephardic Jews who were fleeing the Inquisition.
I see the issue.
Look at the context. If these founders are an elite Spanish ruling class, locked in a Catholic mountain fortress, building Catholic churches, and answering to a Catholic king, where on earth do the Sephardic Jews come into play?
It's a huge paradox.
Weren't these people strictly violently Catholic? How do you reconcile a capitan of the Spanish Empire with a hidden Jewish refugee?
That is the million-dollar historical question. And to answer it, we have to transition from the geography of Colombia back to the brutal politics of Europe. We have to explore one of the most complex, paranoid, and frankly tragic aspects of Spanish colonial history.
We're talking about the camouflage.
Yes, we cannot understand the DNA of Antioquia without understanding the camouflage these people were forced to wear.
We have to talk about the Inquisition. We have to talk about the terrified people who were hiding in plain sight.
To set the stage properly for you listening, the year is 1492. It's a watershed year in global history, not just because Columbus sails for the Americas, but because of what happens inside Spain. The Catholic monarchs, King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile, have just completed the Reconquista.
They finally pushed out the Moors.
Right, they've driven the last Moorish rulers out of the Iberian Peninsula. They're consolidating their power, and they want a unified, strictly Catholic kingdom.
And to achieve that unity, they issue one of the most devastating documents of the era, the Alhambra Decree.
The Alhambra Decree, issued in March of 1492, was an edict of expulsion. It ordered all practicing Jews to leave the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon by the end of July of that same year.
4 months. You have 4 months to liquidate your life. The Sephardic Jews, the Sephardim, had lived in the Iberian Peninsula for centuries. They had deep roots, successful businesses, ancestral homes.
And suddenly it's all gone.
Suddenly, by royal decree, they were faced with an impossible, agonizing choice. You either pack whatever you can carry and march into exile, where you will likely be robbed, starved, or killed on the roads, or you convert to Catholicism.
And understandably, faced with the total destruction of their lives and the very real threat of death, tens of thousands of Jews chose to convert. Or, at the very least, they underwent the Catholic baptismal rites to satisfy the crown on paper.
These forced converts and their descendants became known as the conversos, new Christians.
But the conversion did not buy them peace. It bought them paranoia. The Spanish authorities, and specifically the Spanish Inquisition, which had been established a few years prior, were deeply, violently suspicious that these conversions were entirely fake.
They didn't trust them for a second.
Not for a second. They suspected that many conversos were secretly maintaining their Jewish faith, practicing their rituals in the shadows behind locked doors.
These individuals, the ones who outwardly lived as Catholics but secretly maintained their Jewish heritage, are referred to by historians as crypto-Jews. And it is terrifying to read the primary sources and try to imagine the level of scrutiny they lived under.
It really is.
The Inquisition wasn't just a torture chamber. It was an incredibly efficient, terrifying bureaucracy.
It was a surveillance state.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Inquisition actively encouraged neighbors to spy on neighbors. Servants were interrogated about their employers' habits.
They were looking for the smallest, most mundane details. Did you avoid lighting a fire on Saturday? Did your chimney smoke on Sunday, proving you were working on the Christian Sabbath?
Or food preparation, right?
Exactly. Did you wash your hands in a specific way before eating? Did you refuse to eat pork? There are records of people being investigated by the Inquisition simply because their neighbors noticed they changed into clean linen on Fridays.
Which suggested they were preparing for the Jewish Sabbath.
Right, it was that granular.
If you were even suspected of Judaizing, of practicing Jewish rites, you were subject to arrest, the confiscation of all your property, agonizing torture to extract confessions and the names of other crypto-Jews, and ultimately, execution.
Public execution.
Yes, by being burned alive at the stake in a public auto-da-fe. It was an atmosphere of absolute, suffocating terror.
So, if you're a crypto-Jew living in this surveillance state, fleeing the scrutiny of the Inquisition becomes your only objective. It's a matter of absolute survival, and the discovery of the New World suddenly presented a massive, chaotic, uncharted frontier.
A place to get lost.
A place where you could disappear. Many of these crypto-Jews sought refuge in the colonies.
But the Spanish crown anticipated this. They were paranoid that the colonies would be infected by heresy. They did not want Jews or Muslims in the New World. So they established incredibly strict immigration laws.
To get on a ship, you needed paperwork.
Exactly. To get a license to board a ship to the Americas, you had to prove your limpieza de sangre.
Purity of blood.
Right. You had to provide genealogical proof that you were an old Christian, meaning you had no Jewish or Moorish ancestry in your family tree for generations.
Which meant that for a converso to escape to the New World, they had to get incredibly creative. They had to bypass a hostile, paranoid bureaucracy.
How did they do it?
Through bribery, forgery, and camouflage, they bought fake genealogical documents. They bribed port officials in Seville or Cadiz to look the other way. But most importantly, they adopted new surnames.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They needed names that sounded deeply, traditionally, undeniably Spanish. A shield of Catholic nomenclature to blend into the colonial society, specifically in areas where the gaze of the Inquisition wasn't quite as piercing.
And the Inquisition's gaze in the New World was mostly focused on the major administrative centers.
Yeah.
Mexico City, Lima, Cartagena, the big wealthy capitals.
Exactly. So if you are a crypto-Jew who has just smuggled yourself into Cartagena, you don't stay in Cartagena where the Inquisitors have an office. You push as far into the terrifying, uncharted interior as you possibly can.
You go to the mountains.
You push into the mountains. You push into the new kingdom of Granada. You push into Antioquia.
So we return to the watertight safe.
We return to the safe. And this is where the archival sources I mentioned earlier become explosive. Let's look at the work of David M. Gitlitz, the author of Secrecy and Deceit, and J. Mesa's extensive 1987 archival mapping in Genealogías de Antioquia y Caldas.
Okay, let's hear the archival evidence.
When historians analyze the foundational names of the Paisa region, the names of the people who settled that mountain isolate, a very distinct pattern emerges.
What kind of pattern?
According to these massive genealogical surveys, the foundational names of the region, names like Gaviria, Vasquez, Berrio, and Carvajal, were highly utilized by crypto-Jewish families. These were names frequently adopted by conversos to assimilate into the Catholic societal structures of New Granada.
I see where you're going with this.
You do, because remember the linchpin we talked about earlier, the woman in the 1600s, Manuela de Castrillon y Vasquez? And who did she marry? A Gaviria.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you again. You are building a magnificent narrative structure, but you are making a massive, scientifically unsupported leap.
How is it unsupported? I'm citing peer-reviewed historical archives. I'm citing Gitlitz and Mesa.
You are citing the history of surnames. Listen to what you're doing. You're taking a historical reality that conversos adopted certain names to hide, and you're applying it universally to everyone who holds that name.
Well, in an isolate...
Do you know how surnames functioned in the 15th and 16th centuries? They were not biological markers, they were social constructs.
Explain what you mean.
Surnames could be bought. They could be assumed. Often, a wealthy, legitimate, old Christian Catholic noble would sponsor a newly converted converso family, and that converso family would take the noble's surname as a form of social patronage and protection.
Right, like adopting the name of your patron.
Exactly. Or a peasant might take the name of the estate they worked on. Just because a crypto-Jew adopted the name Vasquez to hide from the Inquisition does not mean that every single person named Vasquez in the New World is a secret Jew.
I hear what you're saying.
You cannot look at a baptismal record from the 1600s that says Manuela de Castrillon y Vasquez married a Gaviria and then definitively, scientifically declare them to be the descendants of crypto-Jews based on a genealogy book published in 1987. That is historically irresponsible.
It's a clue, though.
It's circumstantial evidence. Documents burn. People lie to the census takers. People lie to the priests. Surnames are a camouflage, yes, but they are not DNA. If you genuinely want me to believe that Pablo Escobar's direct ancestors were secret Jews hiding in the mountains of Colombia, you need far more than a list of suspicious last names. Where is the empirical proof?
You know, I was really hoping you would push back exactly like that.
Were you?
I was, because I completely agree with your assessment of the archives. Surnames are social constructs. A piece of paper from 1650 can absolutely be a lie written by a terrified refugee trying to survive. But you know what doesn't lie. You know what you cannot forge, no matter how much gold you give a port official.
I assume you're about to introduce the genetics.
I am bringing out the genetics. I am not just bringing you dusty archives and circumstantial naming conventions today. I am bringing you hard, empirical, molecular proof. We're pivoting away from the historians, and we are handing the microphone to the geneticists.
The floor is yours. Let's hear the science.
In the year 2000, a landmark study was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics. The lead author of this study was Luis G. Carvajal Carmona.
Carvajal, one of the names on your list.
Exactly. And the title of this paper is an absolute academic mic drop. It's titled, Strong American White Sex Bias and a Possible Sephardic Contribution Among the Founders of a Population in Northwest Colombia.
Ah, Carvajal Carmona. Okay. I'm familiar with the American Journal of Human Genetics. This isn't historical speculation. This is peer-reviewed molecular biology.
It is as hard as the science gets. Carvajal Carmona and his team didn't care about surnames. They didn't care about what the Spanish colonial census said. They looked at blood. They analyzed the DNA of the modern population in the Paisa region, specifically focusing on the genetic legacy of Antioquia.
And what markers did they use?
To do this, they isolated two very specific, highly revealing genetic markers, the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA.
For you listening, we need to break down exactly why those two specific markers are the holy grail of population genetics. Let's start with the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is the piece of DNA that determines male biological sex.
Right.
But what makes it magical for historians is how it's inherited. It's passed down exclusively from father to son. It does not mix or recombine with the mother's DNA.
So it's an unbroken chain.
Exactly.
Okay.
Aside from very rare, slow mutations, a man's Y chromosome is a virtually exact copy of his father's and his grandfather's, going back thousands of years.
It's like a genetic zip code that only gets stamped on a specific envelope. Over the centuries, the envelope might get battered, the family might change their name, they might move across the ocean, but that exact genetic zip code never, ever changes.
That is a perfect analogy. The Y chromosome allows us to trace an unbroken, strict paternal line. We look at the mutations on the Y chromosome to categorize them into what we call haplogroups.
And these haplogroups tie to geography.
Right. Different haplogroups are strongly associated with different geographic regions and ancestral populations. Now, on the flip side, you have mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA.
And how does that work?
Mitochondrial DNA is found outside the nucleus of the cell, in the mitochondria, and it is passed down exclusively from a mother to her children. Both sons and daughters inherit their mother's mtDNA, but only daughters can pass it on to the next generation.
Okay, so it traces the female line.
Correct. While the Y chromosome traces the strict, unbroken line of fathers, the mtDNA traces the strict, unbroken line of mothers.
So by sequencing these two markers in the modern population of Antioquia, Carvajal Carmona could theoretically look all the way back to the very first people who stepped into that mountain valley and locked the safe.
Exactly. They could see the geographic origins of the founding fathers and the geographic origins of the founding mothers. What do the data show?
Let's start with the men, the genetic zip code of the fathers. When the researchers sequenced the Y chromosomes of the Antiochian isolate, they found that the male founders were overwhelmingly European. About 94% of the Y chromosomes traced back to Europe.
Which is entirely consistent with the historical record. The conquistadors, the Spanish soldiers, the colonial administrators like Diego Alvarez de Castrillon arriving to claim the territory.
Yes, the broad data matches the history books perfectly, but here's where the data gets absolutely wild and where the history books were missing a massive piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
When the geneticists zoomed in on those European Y chromosomes to look at the specific haplogroups, they didn't just find the typical northern and southern Iberian markers you would expect from standard Spanish soldiers.
What did they find?
They found a statistically significant, undeniably notable proportion of Y haplogroups that are directly scientifically indicative of Sephardic Jewish ancestry.
Wait, really?
Yes. The genetic marker is specific to the Jewish populations of the Iberian Peninsula and the broader Mediterranean diaspora.
Wait, You're saying the genetic sequencing actually caught the conversos?
I am dead serious. The Y chromosomes of the men who founded Antioquia, the men who locked themselves in that mountain fortress, carry the undeniable molecular signature of the Sephardim.
Oh, wow.
They were not just Spanish Catholics, a significant portion of them were genetically Jewish. But wait, it gets even more fascinating. Because that's just the men. Let's look at the mitochondrial DNA, the unbroken line of mothers.
Okay, if the men were 94% European.
The female founders of Antioquia were not European. When they sequenced the mtDNA, the results showed that the female foundational population was overwhelmingly, predominantly Native American, roughly 90% Amerindian mitochondrial DNA.
Oh, wow. I see it now.
What? What just clicked for you?
I have to concede the entire argument to you. You are absolutely right, and I see exactly how the history and the biology synthesize here. If we map that Y chromosome data and the mtDNA data onto the historical migration patterns we discussed, we're looking at a well-documented, highly specific phenomenon.
Tell us what it is.
In population genetics, what you just described is called asymmetric mating.
Asymmetric mating. Unpack that concept for us.
It's incredible how perfectly this corroborates your archival theory. Listen to how the mechanisms align. When these European men arrived in the New Kingdom of Granada in the 16th and 17th centuries, men like Conquistador Diego and the early Gavirias, they were undertaking a brutal, incredibly dangerous journey.
Right, they were soldiers, explorers, administrators, and as we established, refugees.
Exactly. And because the journey was so perilous, they did not bring many European women with them. The demographic of the early colonial migration was heavily male.
Almost exclusively male at the start.
And among those European men were the conversos, the crypto-Jews who were fleeing the absolute terror of the Spanish Inquisition. They needed to get as far away from the inquisitors in Cartagena as possible, so they pushed deep into the most isolated, impenetrable mountains they could find, Antioquia.
They climbed into the safe and pulled the door shut.
Yes. But because there were virtually no European women in these remote mountain valleys, these men, including the hidden Sephardic men who were pretending to be Catholic Spaniards, married and reproduced with the local Native American women.
That is the asymmetric mating.
Exactly. European fathers, Amerindian mothers. The Y chromosomes are European and Sephardic, but the mitochondrial DNA is Native American.
And because the geography of Antioquia is so extreme, nobody else came in to dilute the pool.
Exactly. The geography locked it in. In fact, there was a major follow-up study in 2006 by Bedoya et al. Titled Admixture Dynamics of an Isolate, the Case of Antioquia. It confirmed exactly this mechanism. The isolation amplified those specific founder genes.
So they couldn't hide it in the end?
No. The conversos may have been forced to hide their religion. They may have been terrified into adopting Catholic surnames like Vasquez, Gaviria, and Barrio to survive. They may have publicly lived as devout, pork-eating Catholics attending Mass every Sunday, but they could not hide their DNA. Their molecular truth was biologically imprinted into the entire regional population.
I love that. It's like a genetic fingerprint left at a 400-year-old crime scene. The Spanish Inquisition tried to erase their identities. They tried to burn the evidence, literally burning people at the stake to wipe them from history. But the DNA survived.
It did.
It outlasted the Inquisition, it outlasted the Spanish Empire, and it survived hidden in the cells of the people in the mountains of Colombia.
I have to admit, I was entirely wrong to dismiss your claim as a parlor trick. When you look at the synthesis of the historical archives, the adoption of those specific surnames for survival, paired with the hard, undeniable genetic reality of the Carvajal-Carmona study and the Bedoya study, the conclusion is inescapable.
Right.
The founders of the Paisa region, the colonial aristocracy of Antioquia, were deeply intertwined with Sephardic Jewish refugees. The claim holds up.
I am so glad the science brought you on board, because now that we have definitively established the genetic reality of the Paisa region's converso roots, we have to finish the mission we set out at the beginning of the show.
To connect it to Escobar.
Yes. We have to trace how this specific genetic isolate funneled through the centuries, directly into the household of the world's most infamous cartel leader.
Right. We've established the 17th century mountain fortress. Now we have to connect it to Pablo Escobar. Let's trace the lineage, walk us through the descent, and let's see how this family weathered the centuries.
Okay. We left off in the late 1600s with Manuela de Castrillon y Vasquez. Remember, she's the daughter of the Capitan. She carries the Castrillon noble blood from Asturias and the Converso-associated Vasquez name.
Right, the linchpin.
And she marries into the Gaviria family, another foundational lineage with known Converso ties in the region.
So we have a convergence of elite, isolated lineages right at the start.
Exactly. From Manuela and her Gaviria husband, they have a son, El Mozo Carlos de Gaviria y Castrillon. He's born in 1681 and lives an incredibly long life, dying in 1779.
Almost a century in the mountains. He lives through the entirety of the Bourbon reforms when the Spanish crown was trying to tighten its grip on the colonies. But up in Antioquia, life likely remained highly insular.
Right. They were pretty much running their own show.
Imagine the concentration of that genetic lineage as these families continue to intermarry to preserve their local power.
It's intense. So we follow Almazo Carlos down to his son, Antonio Blas de Gaviria y Mazo, who is born in 1730. From Antonio, the line descends to Francisco Gaviria Galón, who lives from 1760 to 1838. Now, Francisco's timeline is crucial because he lives right through the era of Latin American independence.
Right, he's alive when Simón Bolívar is marching across the Andes, when the viceroyalty of New Granada is collapsing and the Republic of Colombia is being born.
Massive geopolitical upheaval.
And yet, through all of this, the family lineage remains unbroken, anchored right there in the valleys of Antioquia.
They don't flee back to Spain. They don't move to the capital in Bogotá. They stay in the isolate. Francisco's son is Pedro Luis Chiriaco Gaviria Vélez, born in 1797. Pedro's son is Braulio Gaviria Vélez, who lives from 1830 to 1898.
Which means Braulio lives through the incredibly bloody, chaotic 19th century civil wars in Colombia. The country was constantly fracturing between centralists and federalists, but again, the topography of Antioquia provided a buffer.
The mountains protected them again.
Right. The rugged terrain meant that while armies clashed in the valleys, the established landowning families could often maintain their generational continuity.
Exactly. The wealth and the land stay in the family. Braulio has a son named Roberto Gaviria Coblededa, who lives from 1873 to 1943. We have now crossed the threshold into the 20th century.
And just to clarify for the listener, all of these steps from El Mozo Carlos down to Roberto, these are all fully documented, unbroken genealogical links.
Every single one. They're documented in the baptismal records, the marriage certificates, and the local parish archives of Antioquia. It's a straight, unbreakable line of descent. And that unbroken line brings us to Roberto's daughter, a woman born in 1917 who lives until 2006.
Okay, what is her name?
Her name is Hermila de los Dolores Gaviria Berrio.
Berrio. Wait a minute. The second surname. I recognize that name from your earlier list.
I was hoping you would catch that.
That was one of the other highly prominent Converso surnames you mentioned from the Gitlitz and Mesa archives, along with Gaviria, Vasquez, and Carvajal.
It is all coming together. So here we have Hermilda. She carries the Gaviria name from her father. She carries the Berrio name from her mother. She is descended directly, generation by generation, from the Castrillon nobility of 15th century Asturias.
Wow.
She is born deep inside the genetic isolate of Antioquia, carrying the ancestral DNA of Native American mothers and Spanish Sephardic Converso fathers.
She represents the ultimate concentrated synthesis of 500 years of survival, isolation, and asymmetric mating, all locked within the geography of the Andes.
And in 1949, Hermilda de los Dolores Gaviria Berrio gives birth to a son,
Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria.
There it is. The wild ancestral nexus is complete. When you look at Pablo Escobar, yes, of course, you see the immediate product of 1970s Colombia. You see the product of the sociopolitical landscape of Medellin, the poverty, the black market smuggling routes, the institutional weakness of the era.
The standard sociological framework.
Right. But if you look deeper, if you look at the molecular level, you are also looking at the direct genetic inheritor of Basque settlers, of 15th century Asturian nobility, and, incredibly, of persecuted Sephardic Jews who fled across an ocean and climbed a mountain to hide from an inquisition.
It is a profound, almost dizzying historical irony. We analyze a figure like Escobar so intensely, we write thousands of books about his psychology, his environment, his ruthlessness, his impact on global drug policy.
Right.
But beneath all that modern sociology, embedded in his very cells, is a 500-year-old story of terrified religious refugees. People who were hunted by a paranoid state, who had to completely erase their own identities, their faith, and their names just to survive.
And think about the geographic irony. The exact same impenetrable mountains of Antioquia that protected the conversos from the Spanish Inquisition in the 16th century.
Are the exact same impenetrable mountains
Right.
that would later protect the Medellin cartel from the Colombian government and international law enforcement in the 20th century.
Yeah.
The geography was the ultimate shield for both generations.
It forces you to completely reevaluate the sliding doors of history. If Gutierre and Guillomar's descendants back in 1400s, Spain had all gone to the Caribbean instead of the mainland.
Then the bloodline scatters.
Right, or if the Alhambra decree had never been issued and the conversos were never forced into hiding. Or if the region of Antioquia had just been a flat, easily accessible coastal plain instead of a towering Andean fortress. The genetic demography of Colombia would be entirely different.
Completely different.
The people would be different, and perhaps the history of the late 20th century would have played out in a completely different way.
It completely shatters how you view historical causation. And we are so incredibly focused on the immediate, the visible, the things that happened within our own lifetimes. But we're all walking, talking, biological archives. We carry centuries of triumph, trauma, desperate migration, and forced assimilation inside of us.
So let's unpack exactly what we've accomplished here today. We started with a claim that sounded like absolute unhinged historical fiction, but we followed the thread.
We certainly did.
We traveled from the aristocratic manners of 15th century northern Spain through the terrifying paranoid era of the Inquisition. We crossed the Atlantic with the conquistadors, and we explored how a geographical mountain fortress in the New World acted as a genetic time capsule.
A watertight safe.
Exactly. We broke down the science of Y chromosomes, mitochondrial DNA, and asymmetric mating. And finally, we followed an unbroken line of baptismal records to arrive right at the doorstep of Pablo Escobar.
And you proved it. I have to give you full credit. You took a narrative that I initially dismissed as a mathematical parlor trick, and through a rigorous synthesis of population genetics and archival history, you showed that the biological reality is even stranger and vastly more complex than the folklore.
It usually is.
The convergence of the historical record and the molecular data is undeniable.
It is exactly why I love doing these deep dives into the source material. The truth is always so much more nuanced, so much more deeply rooted than the neat little boxes we try to put history into. And it brings up something that I want to leave you, our listener, to think about as we wrap up today.
If I may offer a final thought on that exact point.
Please, go ahead.
If a figure is universally known, as intensely documented, and as deeply analyzed as Pablo Escobar carries the hidden 500-year-old genetic markers of secret religious refugees fleeing a forgotten inquisition, it makes you wonder about the rest of us. What unrecorded historical migrations, what desperate forgotten exiles, and what ancient secrets are quietly coded into the DNA of the people you pass in the street every single day? Or even more profoundly, what epic, untallied history of human survival is secretly written inside your own cells, just waiting for the right scientific light to be seen?